if you've learned anything through internet dating, you never know. So
you don't want to get film catfished.
Exactly.
Welcome to the Film Riot podcast. Today we have Mike Pecci, who is an independent filmmaker out of Boston, who's well on his way to making his first Hollywood feature. Mike did a short film called 12 Kilometers, which isn't online right now, but he says that if you contact him through Instagram, he's willing to give you access to actually watch the short film, which we have info on how you can contact him on the episode page for this episode on our website. But Mike made a short film for that. He put a trailer out, which you can definitely see on the page as well. And it got the attention of some very impressive people. So he's toward the end of development on turning this thing into a feature film. And he really deserves it. Incredibly talented guy. And we're going to get into all of that. He has a lot of insight since he is still on the road toward that first feature, and he was very honest and open about all of it. So you're going to really dig all of that. But before we get to it, I want to thank our sponsor, which is Aperture. Aperture makes all kinds of filmmaking gear, which is really high quality stuff without breaking the bank. I really love their lights, like the 120D and T, and now they have the Mark II 120s, which I just got, and I'm digging. You can dim these things all the way down to 1%. It's fantastic. You throw the dome on there, and they're really soft lights. I'm always talking about them. We got the reviews on the episode page. I use them in all of my stuff. They're just workhorses with great quality, so definitely check out all of that. But now I'm going to shut up and get into it with Mike. How'd you get your start? Where'd you start off with? Did you start as a filmmaker? Did you go to film school?
So years ago, well, the short version of the long story is that initially I wanted to be a comic book artist, and I thought that I was going to get into that trade. And I did. I was a really crappy student in school, so I didn't get into the art school that I wanted to get into. So that kind of derailed me completely. But I was a huge comic book nerd, a huge comic book fan when I was a kid. I often say that the reason why I love comics so much is that I was grounded for so many years of my youth because my grades were so terrible. So I wasn't allowed to watch television.
So it's a good trade-off.
Yeah, now I can thank my mother for it, but at the time, I was pissed at her.
Yeah.
I was obsessed with comic books. I loved the art of telling a story within a frame. And then when I didn't get into art school, I went off and worked at a music store for years. And so I was just as amped about music, and I loved playing new music for people. And I thought that I was going to have a career in radio. So I went to school for radio, and when I had my first radio show, and the general manager came up to me and said, okay, so every 15 minutes on the hour, you play CDs with the green sticker, and then at the bottom of the hour, you play CDs with the blue sticker. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing here?
Oh, yeah.
And luckily I made that decision. That was like right before MP3s, right before the whole Napster thing. So I made the right call, and I just happened to be filling credits with a film class. I figured this would be an easy course. I'll go in there and watch movies. And surprisingly previous to that, and this was like 1998. So this was before like there were podcasts. It was before there was like real behind the scenes videos. So I really didn't pay attention to how movies were made. It didn't occur to me that people were making them. Somehow as a kid, you have a window into like Indiana Jones's world.
Yeah, it's just magically constructed.
Yeah, like you're not an idiot. He's not there, but you just don't think about it. And when I sat in this film course, and of course we watched all the typical film course movies. We watched, Citizen Kane, and I saw Blade Runner for the first time in there. And then, someone brought up cinematography, and someone brought up wardrobe, and then it just clicked, and I went, oh my God, there are people that do this for a living.
Right.
And this, this takes what I love about comic books and what I love about music and smashes them together. Oh my God, I think I might have found something here. And at the time I was going to a community college, and I remember being very annoyed with the fact that I had to pay a ton of money to take courses that didn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
So they, you'd have that standard curriculum that they need to keep their license or whatever, or their accreditation. And so you're going through going, all right, I want to be a filmmaker. And I remember my guidance counselor at the time was like, okay, cool. Well, you're not going to be able to pick up a camera for at least 2 years. But until then, you could take this course and this course. And I'm like, how much do each one of these courses cost? And he's like, this and this. And I'm like, I'll see you later, dude. I'm out of here, man. And at the time, I did a lot of research, and I was looking into film schools, and I looked at like out here in Boston, I looked at Emerson, which is a very famous school, and they had sort of the same curriculum where it's like, all right, I'm going to pay the same amount of money as the guy next to me, but I might end up being a boom operator. And I'm like, I don't want to do that either. And so I found at the time, they were very early on, I found New York Film Academy, and they were just doing like short run courses. And they promised that you would direct and shoot, at least 3 shorts within like a half-year period. And so I was like, all right, cool, I'm in it. And saved up a bunch of loot, and I moved to New York City for the first time ever with no contacts, no family. I was out there at like 22, and it was the coolest thing in the world for me because I learned how to live in a city that I had never been to before, produce in a city that I had never been to before, figure out how to do locations, and you're doing casting sessions at like Barnes & Noble, figuring all that stuff out. And I mean, that school really didn't teach me much about directing, but it did teach me a hell of a lot about producing.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I got into filmmaking. And then after going to school, I almost stayed in New York, but then, I sort of had this moment of like, it's been so very difficult for me to get the locations and stuff that I want in the city because I don't have a lot of money and I don't have contacts here yet. If I go back to my hometown, I bet you I can convince all these people to do all this really great stuff for me. And so I made that decision and call and came back here to Boston. And it was one of the better decisions I made because this city is still sort of enamored by filmmaking. So I can walk into a location and just wow them with the actual act that we're making a movie.
Yeah.
And, people will give me access to some really beautiful spots,
Yeah. I totally relate to that. The film school I went to was the same. It was Full Sail. It was just a 1 year in and out, just pure focus on the thing, which taught me very little about directing as well. It was very technical school, but I was the same way. It's like, why am I going to go to this school and pay money to, take these classes that I don't care about when all I want to do is, learn filmmaking. So I totally relate to that. And then I totally relate to the fact of not staying in an LA or a New York or going somewhere else, like where, as you said, they're enamored by filmmaking. So you can go into some mom and pop thing and be like, hey, I'm making a movie. Can I use your place? And they're like, hell yeah, you can. It's so much easier. Yeah. Whereas in LA and New York, they're just sort of jaded by it now. They're like, oh, great, another one.
For sure, man. And it was like, you often go back and you look like this year I turned 40, which was a wild experience. And then you often go back and you look and go, all right, so did I make the right move? Should I have been here and been there? But then as you look at your catalog, and basically, as I look back on my career at this point, is, being a very successful music video director, being someone that has owned a business for about 10 years, that is not in debt, has great credit, has all these really good things. And I'm like, it's been nice being like a big fish in a little pond. And Boston has since got a really great tax incentive, so they're shooting everything here. So the city, it's like a second Atlanta. So it's like Boston and Georgia. It was Detroit for a while, but then I think Detroit pulled the tax incentive out. So the city has like a huge, really amazing crew, really great resources as far as like sound stages are concerned and equipment is concerned and gear is concerned. And being in business in a spot like this for about 18 years, you're really relying on your contacts. And at this point, it's super cool to be in a spot where people know and respect your work, and you give them a call on the phone. It's like, hey, can I borrow, a grip truck with gear? And they're like, take it. You know what I mean? So it works really well.
Okay, so you went to film school, you did the music video bit, you did the commercial bit, but you really want to be a director and you want to make your film. And now you have this film that you've been working on. And it sounds like a very interesting path that led you to actually creating this film. So could you kind of unpack that?
Sure, man. Yeah. I had done a bunch of shorts previously, and I was doing shorts in my spare time. And most of the time when I started a short film, it was just to practice a specific technique most of the time. It was like, all right.
Totally. I totally relate to that. I do the exact same thing.
Yeah, dude. I watch your stuff. You and I are on the same sort of path with that, where it's like, I want to practice this thing, so I'll do it. And you never really took it super seriously because I never really felt like I had that story, like that real connective story that I wanted to throw all my chips on the table with.
Right, exactly.
And so I had been doing this for years in the music video business for years, and I got distracted with life. And so I really wasn't doing much of the directing stuff. And I started here's the funny story. So I went on a date. So I started to date this girl. And we were going out for a little while, and she was bugging me about going ice skating. Now, at the time, I was probably like 34, something like that. I had never put ice skates on in my life. Like, I'm the most awkward fucking dude as far as walking is concerned. And so I was just avoiding it. I was like, yeah, that'd be a great idea. It'd be such a cool thing. And, and I was just constantly pushing it off and pushing it off. And so you finally get that conversation where it's like, okay, so we're always doing what you want to do and we're not doing what I want to do. And you're like, okay. All right. So
fine.
Right. Okay. So what's the worst that's going to happen? I like a twist an ankle or something. Fine. Okay. So let's go. So we go down to this huge skating rink down in downtown Boston here called Frog Pond. It's like the big dating spot. We go down there and throw these ice skates on my feet, and I'm walking around on these blades, and watching these little kids skate pirouettes and like skate all over the place. And the girl grabs my hand and pulls me out on the ice, and she starts pulling me around. And I'm getting frustrated because I can't figure it out. And I say to her, like, look, just do me a favor, skate off, and I'll figure this out. Like, go have some fun.
Yeah.
And I'll do this.
Go away for a minute.
Yeah.
Let me do my thing.
Yeah. So she skates away, and I turn and I look at like this little 5-year-old that's like, like Tanya Harding or whatever, just skating around doing whatever it's doing. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I watch the process and I do the same thing. I push myself off. And as I do, I slip and my feet come out completely from underneath me. And I do almost a 180, practically 180, and land on the top of my head with all my body weight.
Oh.
And the last thing I hear is the sound of an old oak barrel cracking.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm out cold. And so she tells me afterwards that when she skates away, she hears it. The whole rink hears it. And she goes over, and I'm out cold on the ice. And the owners of the place come skating out, and she's like, oh my God, call an ambulance. They're like, no, he's fine. And she's like, no, call an ambulance.
No, he's fine.
Meanwhile, they're skating out little orange cones, and they're putting cones around me so that they don't have to close the rink. So that the kids
oh my God. He just needs to walk it off. He's good.
And so, all right, so I'm out cold, right? So I wake up, and there's a doctor shining a flashlight in my face. And so I come to, and I'm very disoriented. And I look at him, and I'm like, in my head, I haven't taken a break from work in at that point, 10 years, And in my head, I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, shit. I broke a leg. I passed out. I mean, how long is this going to take me out? I got a bunch of work I'm supposed to do this week. And that's all that's running through my head. And the doctor looks down at me and he goes, okay, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Here's the deal. You've cracked your skull. So your skull is cracked. You're bleeding internally. There's a puddle of blood forming on the top of your head. So you have a hematoma forming on top of your head. It's putting pressure on your brain. We can't let you go to sleep because you might not wake up. Normally what we do is we drill a hole in the top of your skull to release this pressure, but it is forming right on a blood vessel. So if we drill just like a hair too deep, you bleed out and you die. So what we're going to do here is we're going to sit and wait and see if the bleeding stops. And I advise that you call your family. I advise you get folks here. And so I turn and look, and there's the girl that I'm on this date with, and she's there with me. And I look at her and I'm like, you need to call my parents.
Also, this is your fault.
Yes, this is your fault, but you have to have really the first conversation with my mother, telling her that you have me in a hospital. So here's my number for my parents. Call my parents for me.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And so she goes off and does that. And then I start, because I can't go to sleep, they keep me awake for 48 hours. And they're just coming in and shining a flashlight in my eyes. And because this puddle is forming on my brain, and I could show you the CAT scan, it's insane. It's pushing my brain down, and I'm starting to hallucinate. I'm having these crazy hallucinations where the shadows in the room start coming to life. I start traveling from place to place. And the big thing was that my inner voice, I was convinced that my inner voice didn't belong to myself, that it wasn't mine. And the whole time, there's recordings of this where I would turn to the girl and go, I'd come out of whatever trance I was in because I wasn't allowed to go to sleep. And I would turn to her and go, you need to record this. I just went through this really crazy adventure. And I would tell her what was happening. So fast forward, I was in intensive care for about 5 days. The bleeding stopped, and then became the process of recovery from the multiple concussions that I had from falling on ice skates, by the way.
You gotta change the story, make it like bigger.
Yeah.
So there was this bear, right?
Yeah. Well, dude, and so when I watch football, I'm like, those guys are out of their mind, you know. But anyway.
Dude, totally.
Yeah.
I'm a very fragile man.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm with you. That's what would happen to me. I put on ice skates, I break my face.
So the doctor says to me, look, it's going to take you probably about 5 months. You can't do anything. I'm like, well, he's like, what is your job? And I go, my job is this. And he goes, yeah, you can't do that. It's very stressful, you know, and you could restart bleeding. It's a big deal. So you can't do anything. And so now I'm suffering from vertigo and I'm suffering from like massive migraines and headaches. And luckily I went on basically a forced vacation, and I went and stayed with my parents, thank God, for like 5 months. And through that whole process of time, I was incredibly inspired by the events that were happening to me. So I started to write a script, and I had this really cool idea for a script that had to do with like losing your inner voice. And I was writing one sort of based around someone that was in the same situation I was in, like going through the hospital, because I got a crash course in the medical field, because like being through all that stuff, it was insane, like home nurses and everything else. It was wild.
Sure.
So I started to write the script. Now, rewind a few years earlier, I had heard this story about the Kola Peninsula and the Russian drill team that had dug the deepest hole known to man, 12 kilometers into the planet. And there was rumors circulating, I think spread by either some sort of Christian fundamentalist or something.
Yeah, it was.
That they were lowering microphones down into the planet, and they heard the screams of hell. And I remember initially hearing this idea going, that'd be a really great short. And this was years and years before. I was like, this would be a really great short. And at the time I was talking with an actor buddy of mine who was Russian. And I joked with him. I go, yeah, if we did this short, I'd do it all in Russian. And he was laughing. And I'm like, but no one's going to want to pay for that.
Right.
And so, you know.
Which, by the way, I did watch the short, and I was, because we talked about briefly that I also had a concept I was working on around the Siberian hell sounds. And I watched the short, and I was delighted to find out that our concepts are like completely different from each other. So I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to throw it away.
Good.
But we'll get to the short soon.
So I heard the story about these Russians that were doing this, and I had this idea that, you know, without giving too much away, I had this idea that there was some sort of infection and it was causing your inner voice to change and blah, blah, blah. And so I needed some sort of origin story for it. And so I went back, and I was originally had written the events that happened in Russia as just a cold open for this whole feature that I was doing.
Right.
And so as I started to recover, and I was going through 5 months of recovery, I was working on this, like a draft of this. And in my head, I'm like, okay, look, if I'm going to make a feature, I have to do a proof of concept. Now, here's a funny little side story. Maybe it's not funny, but here's a funny little side story that will set this up as well. Like right before I had my head injury, I had decided that I wanted to do, I had some really cool ideas on doing a Punisher fan film. And I wanted to do a movie about the Punisher. And this was prior to, like, I think Disney hadn't even made the deal yet. And there was no Punisher on the horizon. And I had this really cool concept on how to tell, you know, just like day-to-day stories with Frank Castle. And there was a bunch of really great fan film stuff that was out there. And I was like, this is a good way to get attention, and maybe I can use it to maybe pitch Marvel at the time to do something. I was even thinking like online content. I wasn't even thinking like film shit.
Yeah.
And so me and my team got together, and we filmed this really beautiful proof of concept. And we started to film this really beautiful proof of concept. And I made the grave mistake of releasing like a poster and a quick teaser for it online before we had released the movie. And the internet kind of blew up. Like all the comic book resources, like all these different places were writing that this looked gorgeous, this looked better than anything Marvel's ever done, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody was like chomping at the bit for it.
Ruh-roh.
Exactly, dude. And then I get that letter with a specific animated character's face on it. And they tell me that I can't do it and I have to stop everything that I'm doing, which was a huge fucking bum out. It was a huge bum out for us at the time. And so I had convinced that whole crew, and my biggest problem was that I had convinced that whole team of people to do this thing, and everybody was going to see it, and now no one could physically see it. So back to where I was after the head injury and I was writing the script and I knew that I had to make a proof of concept. I also knew that I was going to tap back into that team of people. So at that point, it was like, okay, look, I can't just do some sizzle reel. I can't do like a 5-minute sizzle reel collection of stuff. It has to be a short that I can show in the theater that has an arc, because I have to, it's really a love letter to this team of people that has already gone through it with me. And so that's how I came about doing the short film called 12 Kilometers. And we ended up making this film here in Boston. It's basically, it started as the cold open for the movie. I just took the idea for the cold open and blew it up a bit and made it into like a 30-minute piece. And yeah.
So how did the short come around? You kickstarted it?
So I started by kickstarting, yeah. So I had never done a Kickstarter before, and that in itself is this whole interesting process of like, it's basically like starting a business. And so I went through the process of kickstarting and I raised some loot for that. I think we raised like 16 grand or something for that.
Oh, wow.
And then the rest of it was all pretty much self-financed after that. So Kickstarter started it, and then the rest was out of my pocket, which at the time I had done a couple of like decent sized commercials, and I just was like, okay, cool. I can eat ramen for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and just invest in yourself. I love that. So
it's important.
You wrote this feature script, then you made 12 Kilometers as a proof of concept, which is the cold open.
Yep.
And then what? Because now you're talking to some people about it, right? Can you talk about that at all?
I can talk vaguely about that. I'm sure you understand.
Of course,
works.
I know exactly what you mean. And so how'd you go about getting these conversations to happen? Because this isn't public. You shared a private link with me, so this isn't out for the public to see. There's a trailer. So how did you end up getting these contacts and start making these conversations happen without this going out there and being viral or getting people to, publications to post about it?
It is an interesting conversation there, because the normal rule of thumb is to put things out and have them go viral.
Right.
But one thing I learned through doing the Dead Can't Be Distracted, which was that fan film that I was doing, is I got more attention for it when it wasn't public.
Oh, wow.
Which was interesting. So I actually got more interest from it that way. And so I was really just sort of trying to build a sense of mystery around the film. And then when I do share it with folks, and I still do it now, I'll do a thing on Instagram or something where I'll ask the people that follow me, like, hey, look, if you want to see 12KM, do me a favor and write me a note. Tell me your favorite horror movie and why you should be the one to see this film. And then folks will write to me, and then I basically make a deal with them. I'm like, look, this can't get released. This can't get leaked. And if you're going to watch this, I need you to do something for me. I need you to watch it and honestly review it, and go to IMDb after you're finished and write an honest review. Like if you think it sucks, go say it sucks, And my exchange and my interactions have been so much better that way. I feel like when I dump things online, folks will just passive aggressively watch it.
Yeah.
And, maybe interact with it, and then that's it. But if you have people that intentionally are seeking you out because they want to see it and intentionally are interested in what it is that you're doing, then I feel like the viewing experience is the closest thing to when I can screen it for people myself.
Yeah.
So it works really well that way. So when I started, and, to be 100% transparent about it, initially when I started doing it, I didn't put it online because I was going to submit to festivals. And here's another interesting story for the listeners. When you submit a short to film festivals, if you look at what their guidelines are, is they usually say anywhere from 5 minutes to 40 minutes for a short. So I had looked at those guidelines initially. And so 12KM, the short, is actually a 30-minute piece. And I was like, okay, I'm 10 minutes within the guidelines of a film festival, so I'm good. And when I was editing, I like to bring different folks in through different stages for the edit process. And towards the end, I brought in a couple of film festival programmers that I know, because I just wanted to get their feedback and see what they thought. And I had one of the dudes came in and sat down and watched the movie, finished it, and he was like, I love it. And I was like, okay, cool. Is there anything that you didn't like? Is there sections that you goes, I love it. Don't change it. Don't change anything. And I was concerned because I did a movie in a different language. I did a movie with subtitles. And so that's a whole other conversation. And so I said to him, okay, cool. So what do you think? How do you think I should market this towards film festivals? And he goes, oh, you're not going to get into any film festivals.
From uplifting to right at the bottom.
Yeah. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, it's just too long. You're not going to get into film festivals with this.
But like maybe one?
And I was like, really? And he goes, yeah, I'm telling you right now. And I was like, okay, so cool. What do I cut out then? What do you think I should cut out to get into film festivals? He goes, don't cut anything. I was like,
you're not helping.
So I'm screwed, is what you're saying. And he's like, try, man, and go ahead and try. And then I went through the process of, finding out for myself. And the film festival thing, you're, $800 deep in submission fees.
Yeah.
And rejection. And I would have festival programmers write to me and go, we love the movie. We just can't find a place for it. If we program your film, we lose 3 shorts.
Right.
And I'm like, are the shorts any good? Like, is this movie's a good closer for you? Like, to have it. And so I just wasn't getting. I think I got into like 2, maybe 3 festivals total. And I was really disappointed. And I submitted to like Fantasia. I submitted to like all these big sci-fi places that I thought I was going to get into because of the quality of the short.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're frustrated because you're like, okay, film festivals is the only way you get in, So you're like, God damn it. And so I just didn't give up on it. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to do some press releases online about it with the trailer. And I'll sort of send out these press releases. And I had a really great article reviewer here in town. And he's like, I'll do a whole profile on your head injury. I'll do a whole profile on all your stuff. And he wrote like a really amazing article, very long article about the whole thing that didn't get me any traffic. And I randomly got a text from an old friend of mine, Izzy Lee, and she wrote for Twitch Film. And I had never heard of Twitch Film before. I had heard of Twitch, but I had never heard of Twitch Film. And she was like, I'd love to see the film. Can you send it to me? I said, sure, here it is. So I sent it away, and she watches it, and she writes an amazing little review for it. She goes, I really love it. This is something that Hollywood should be making right now. I don't understand why people don't know about it. And like I said, I didn't know anything about Twitch Film, never been on my radar. That week, I started to get emails. And that week, I started to get the emails from different studios. I think Netflix sent me an email. You're a young independent film producer trying to navigate your way through that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I got an email from a guy who was like, hey, I was looking at your website. I noticed that you're not repped for film. Like, you don't have any representation for film. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm repped for commercials and music videos and stuff, but I don't have any rep for film. He's like, oh, I'm a manager and I'd love to rep you. And from my perspective, when someone says that to me from here in Boston, I just imagine he's wearing like a polyester suit and he's in a closet somewhere.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh.
I don't know.
I'm like, cool. Yeah, you wanna do that, huh? All right. And so that sort of started the attention on that side. Now, as a side note, and you can interject here at any point because I do my own podcast and I'm just rambling on. So
No. Please continue.
So on a side note, I feel like one of the things that I've learned the longer that I've directed is that directing really is a series of good decisions.
Yeah.
And being a successful director is a series of good lucky decisions that you make. And when I decided to do 12KM, like I mentioned before, I decided to do it in Russian. Now, I don't speak Russian.
Right.
It's not my native tongue. And so I had to cast Russian actors. I had to cast folks that spoke a different language than I did. And I knew I was going to be directing scenes and trying to navigate my way through scenes spoken in a language that I didn't speak. Normally what I would do is, in the past, I've DP'd, I've shot and directed all my own stuff. And this time around, I'm like, look, you're producing it. You're doing this crazy movie in another language. You can't handle this stuff, Mike. You can't do all of it. So you got to get a DP. And I had been talking with this guy, David Kruta, for years. And he was a very successful DP out of New York. And him and I had just sort of been, internet dating.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The equivalent of sexting. if you're
Film sexting.
Gearheads. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to him and I was like, dude, this is the project. Your style complements my style, but you are better at so many different things than I am. And that was important to me, as I wanted to work with a cinematographer that was better than I was. And so we ended up working together. And the benefit of that, and that was one of those good decisions. The benefit of that is that he just won the Emerging Cinematographer Award or something through the ASC. I'm screwing that up, but he won an award at that point and was getting management and representation. And after we had shot the film, he called me on the phone and I was editing it. And he's like, dude, I'm up for a big movie. And I was like, cool, man. He's like, can I get clips from 12 cam to show them? And, you know, if you work on my stuff, of course, you know what I mean? Like, that's my currency. That's my currency, you know,
exactly.
So I will cut something for you and, you know, you can show it. And so he calls me back a few hours later and he's like, the writer and potential producer of it wants to talk to you about directing it. And I was like, okay.
Go on.
And I was like, what's the movie about? I don't think I can mention his name, but it stars a specific action film guy, actor who liked to do a lot of kicking. Just put it that way.
I think I'm picking up what you're putting down.
You know, and there's a lot of guys that kicked back then, so it's not, you know, it's a very difficult decision. It's a very difficult decision. And so I was like, sure, you know, and I'm in the middle of cutting this movie. I was like, sure, I'll talk to this guy. And so I did a Skype call with the writer, and it was this dude, Will Simmons. And he was like, I love the short for 12 cam. It's really fantastic. Do you have a feature? And I said, I've written an early draft of the feature. And my whole thing is like, look, I come up with great ideas. I'm not a screenplay writer. I'm a writer out of necessity as a director because I need to have stuff to direct. But I don't consider myself a really fantastic screenplay writer. And he goes, let me read your script. And so I sent him over my draft of my script, and he went through and he goes, it's really great. He's like, but I would really love to pitch you an idea that goes back to the source of everything, goes back to the whole, goes back to the place, and we talk about that. And I was like, sure. And at the time, I really didn't do my research on him. I'm like, okay, so let me see some of your work. Let me see your stuff. It turns out that Will was one of the, you know, the website Blacklist for screenplays that don't get produced. So he was a Blacklist winner, I think back in 2013. He did a script called Murder City.
Oh, okay.
And so I read through his stuff, and I'm like, this guy's much better than I am at screenplay writing. So good decision number 2. So because of my good decision with getting a DP, besides the fact that he was fantastic and we're like, you know, sexting all the time now, we're best bros, I was able to meet this writer. And so good decision number 2 was hooking up with this writer because he has written a draft. He started with a draft of 12 cam for a feature that was fantastic, really, really amazing. And so then after we had written that, our plan was to just go out to Los Angeles, or he's out in LA. I was going to fly out to Los Angeles, and we were just going to go show the short and pitch the script. So now we catch up to the point where there's a guy in a polyester outfit in a closet.
Here you are.
You know, is saying to me like, hey man, you know, you want representation. And so I told him, I said, look, I'm coming out to California. I refuse to make deals with people over the phone. I have to see people face to face because you never know. Yeah. It's like if you've learned anything through internet dating, you never know. So
you don't want to get film catfished.
Exactly. It'll be on MTV. It'll be terrible.
Yeah, exactly. Oh God, I knew it.
So I ended up going out to California, and the guy's like, well, come by our offices and, you know, pitch to us first. And I was like, okay. And so I hang up the phone with him, get off the phone with him, and then my writer calls me immediately. And my writer is on the phone, and I literally hung up the phone. He goes, hey, I hear you're talking to this guy. And I was like, what the hell? Like, you got my house? You have my house bugged? Like, what's going on? He's like, no, I have a friend that works in those offices. He's like, they're pretty huge. I was like, okay, dude. And now, mind you, I've been talking with him for about 6 months, and I haven't met him face to face yet either. So it's just been Skype calls and phone calls.
What company is he with?
So it's a Gotham Group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so when I went out to California, I went and spent some time with my writer for the first time. So we go out to have our first dates, you know, we hang out and eat meals together and talk about our favorite movies, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Woo each other and all that.
All that stuff, like, this is what your face looks like. You know, like that
it's
kind
so beautiful.
And then I'd tell him, like, look, you know, we're going to do this pitch. He's like, sounds really great. And so meanwhile, he's repped by a bunch of different folks himself. So he has all those people there, and he's like, you know, we'll bring up my people into it and all that. I was like, okay. So we go to this building, and I have no idea who these people are, you know. And so we go to this space, and it's huge, you know. And as soon as I get there, I'm like, oh my God, like I am completely unprepared.
Yeah,
unprepared, like mentally for what I'm about to do here. And to go into this massive place, and these guys do really amazing things. and we sit down in the room to do a pitch. Now, me and the writer are pitching together, which I really enjoy now, because it's really nice going into a room with somebody. That way you guys can sort of do not good cop, bad cop, but like sort of take certain aspects and throw it to each other.
Oh,
which
God,
is really
that
great.
sounds so much better than pitching alone.
Dude, because then you can read the room.
Yeah.
So like, because when you're pitching by yourself, you're in that fucking tractor beam.
Totally. And
like,
I just freaking hate pitching. So having like somebody to tag team to like, if you get that like little mental hiccup, they can just pick up for you.
Oh, sure. And then when you're tossing it, because we'll rehearse it. So like we'll talk about it ahead of time, and we'll actually go through like who's going to talk about what and when we're going to pass it off to each other. So you have it's like being in a basketball game. You know you're going to have a moment on the bench where you're just like, okay. You're like all sweaty. You're like, oh, all right. And you're looking at like how people are reacting to him, and you're like, oh, he needs some assist here. Hold on. You sort of jump in to do that. It works. It works really well. So we go and we do this badly the first time, by the way. We go in and do it badly, and we pitch to the room, and the guys were like, we love this idea. We love this idea. We'll sell this idea. How long are you out here in California? And I said, I don't know. I was out here for a couple of days. They go, can you be out here for 10 days? I was like, sure. I'll change my schedule. I'll do that. Of course I was going to say yes. And they're like, we'll hook you up with some meetings. And that was the start. That was like the beginning of this very surreal, weird adventure of going around to different, basically looking for a producer to partner with the film. So going around and talking to different production companies. And in my mind at that time, I had spent all this money on the short. I had gone through the process of doing and it's a whole longer story on how to direct a movie in another language. And I had done all this stuff, and I was just out here going and meeting with amazing people. And at that point, I'm like, okay, so this is it. This is my payment. Like, even if nothing happens, this is my payment. Like, this is what I get for all that hard work, is I get to be in the room with this person, be in the room with this person. And like, it was just stunning. It was like a really crazy, out of this world experience. And kudos to the management team for doing such a great first week for me to go out there and pitch. Like, dude, I was in rooms with people, dudes that created movies with guys with chainsaw arms, and dudes that created movies about aliens and all these different things. So it was a crazy fucking week.
That's crazy, man. And how long ago was that?
That was probably just a year and a half ago.
Okay.
I think was when that was.
So has the process just kind of been like continuous, just developing this thing?
Yeah. So it was it's an interesting thing, and I'll talk a bit about it. After we had gone out and did those meetings, and we met with a bunch of different folks. And by the way, I had just heard your last episode that you did about meetings.
Oh, with Seth.
With Seth, which I thought was fantastic. And a lot of that stuff I was chuckling through because I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. It's just that pain that we all go through, the growing pains.
So we went out and did these pitches, and some of them go well, some of them, the deal.
Yeah.
You're in a room with someone that's like, oh my God, how do you come up with these ideas? And you're in the room with someone that's just like, let me tell you how the business works, kid. And you're
totally. They're like these blind dates that you go on, and they're either going to think you're pretty or they're going to think you're real ugly. And there's no way to tell one or the other.
Oh, dude. And the most surreal, and I'm not going to tell, I have to be very careful about this, but the most surreal one that I had was we went into a room, and the producer, we waited for a little bit, and then we walk into the room, and the producer sits there and he goes, hey, and we're like, hey, and he's like, I want it. I'm like, you want what? You haven't even heard it yet. do you want to hear what it is? He goes, I want it. And I'm like, how do you know what it is? Like, how do you know you want it? How do you know what it is? He's like, I've seen the stuff. I want it. And I'm like,
I got extra money. I want it.
I'm like, okay. I remember walking out of the room going like, I don't know what that is, dude.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of adventure that would be if we say yes to that. So I come home. We do all these pitches. I think we did like at least 12.
Wow.
We did a bunch.
Wow. Yeah.
We did a bunch. So I come home, and a few weeks go by. And I feel like this is one of the negatives about me being on the East Coast and not out there.
Yes.
Is that when I am out there, everything's going. And then when I come back here, it's like the heat is just turned down a bit for those guys, And so I come back over here, and a couple weeks go by. We hear nothing. And, my management is like, there's a guy that wants it, so you should probably say yes. And I'm like, I don't know about that guy, And there was this one specific place that we went to. There was one production company that we went to that I was holding out for. And I remember we got that meeting at the very last day that I was out there in California. And we had the management team called me up and they said, hey, would you like to take a meeting with so-and-so? And I wish I could say who it is right now, with so-and-so. And let me just say, guys, so-and-so is the reason why I'm in cinema. Okay. So it was like, okay. And so I remember turning to the writer and I go, I don't care if they don't want this movie. I don't care. I said, I have to go in and kill this. I have to go in and talk to these guys. I have to go in and do this right because I want to work with these guys at some point in time. I have to nail this. And we did. And we walked out of that meeting and I was like, that was the best meeting that we've had, best meeting like for the whole week. Very excited about it. I can't even talk. Very excited about it. And come home, nothing. You know the deal. Dead silence.
Yeah.
Dead silence.
They all thought I was ugly after all.
Yeah. It's just like, oh, yeah. All right. I guess, when you look at the paperwork, maybe we're not that cool.
Right.
And so we're sitting around waiting, and I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, we get the call back. And finally, these guys call and like, we love the idea. It fits our brand. Like, we're very into it. We have a couple of questions for you. Can you shoot on sets? And like a couple of specific detail questions. And I was like, yes, of course. I can handle all that stuff. No big deal. So then they were just like, okay. And hung up the phone.
What does okay mean?
Yeah, I remember saying to the writer, like, what does it mean? What does this mean? What does any of this mean? And it took us a few days to figure it out. And, then they were like, yeah, we want to do this with you. And that started the process of actually working on the script, like writing and rewriting the script and coming up with a great version of this script to fit within a certain budget range. Because at this point, even though I've been directing for 18 years, I am a first-time director.
Yeah.
So I have to be able to do a movie that fits within a certain budget range. And if it doesn't meet that budget range, then it doesn't get directed by me. So, it's been an interesting challenge because the film that we're making is best described as like an adventure horror, sci-fi horror movie. So it's like, you take The Thing, blend it with Alien, a little bit of Close Encounters, a little bit strangely, like I always bring Jurassic Park into it because of the whole collection of people that are involved.
Yeah.
And sort of the opening for Jurassic Park. And you saw 12 Cam, so you know that I'm a huge Spielberg nerd. Mm-hmm. So it's got all these different elements, which is difficult if you're trying to come in at a certain price range.
Yeah, those are delicious ingredients, though. Like, I want that stew.
Oh, dude. And then when you see the trailer, and the trailer goes, from the man who did blah, 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 blah,
Right.
You're going to go, like me and my buddies would watch that trailer and go like, yes, when's this happening? When am I going to get there? Is there a midnight screening? Am I going? And my name will be very small at the back end.
Yeah. And also Mike.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's directed by this guy that you guys don't know, but, and it's like, I'm totally cool with that. I am totally cool with that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that became the process of writing it. And here's what I've learned about screenplay writers. Like writing a screenplay is so difficult to begin with. To actually just come up with a cohesive story and put it down on the paper and have it make sense, like in arcs, and have your arcs make sense, have your character arcs make sense, have all that stuff happen. That's a miracle to do, and that is a craft to figure out. And if you meet someone that knows how to do that, holy crap, you're like 5 steps ahead of the game. Then there's this whole other thing on like, how do I write something for executives to read?
Right.
Which is a whole other game. How do I put together a script that is fast, that gets to the point, that captures the imagination of these folks immediately, and is like a really quick read. And then, on top of it all, having the skills to navigate the notes, which is an interesting thing. Like when you start to get notes from folks that you're working with, or you get notes from people that are interested in the movie, how do you navigate those? And how do you do changes to your script? And then there's an art to crafting the email to present those changes to the script.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much from him just hanging out and working on this project. So it all goes back to that, making a good decision. As a director, and checking your ego and going, yeah, I may not be the best person for this, so let me go work with someone better. And now we're at this point, which is really kind of cool.
Did you fight back on any notes?
Sometimes. I mean, the trick is, I think that for me, when I'm making a film, ultimately, I'm making a movie that I want to see, but I'm ultimately making a movie because I enjoy the experience with an audience. I'm not one of those directors that hates to go watch his movie. Like, I love it. That's the whole purpose for me. Like, I'm the oldest of 4 kids. I used to love scaring kids. I used to love causing. I convinced my sister when she was in her crib that she couldn't get out because there was alligators underneath, and I just laughed at the responses. Like, it's the reason why I'm doing horror. And I joke all the time that if I wasn't doing horror and thriller stuff, then I would be doing romantic comedies, because they both get the same level of reaction from the audience.
Right.
As far as beats are concerned. So when I get notes, I'm always looking for good notes. And I'm always sitting there going, okay, so you're on the complete outside perspective and you read this thing and this is what you were thinking. I don't necessarily agree with how your fixes are, but the fact that you have a problem with that is something that we need to address.
Right.
You know, and I think that's the way to do notes. And sometimes, you know, some of the responses you get are just completely out of left field, because I think a lot of the time when people are reading scripts, they're doing it in the middle of 100 other things. So they're potentially on a set and they're like, okay, look, these guys are pressuring me. I got to read this new draft. And then for some folks, it's like, I need to make notes in order to prove that I read this draft. So then you sort of filter through these notes and you understand like which ones are essential and which ones are just like, I got it. You made it to the script. Perfect. That's what that note was there for. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. But in general, like the dudes that we're working with have had fantastic notes. And every time that they've made us go back and rework the script, we found something even more delicious in the new combination of stuff that we do. And we recently just condensed it even further and just got approval on it, which is fantastic. But we condensed it even further down to this like very claustrophobic movie, which is super cool.
That's awesome.
There's a lot of really fun scares that we can do in that.
Yeah, that's always something that I love most about notes, is even when I don't agree, like what you said, with what the actual note is, it forces you to take a harder look at everything and to think a little deeper and sort of think about left turns instead of right turns maybe. And it always seems to, as long as you, like you said, have the audience in mind and the end result in mind, it always seems to me so far to lead to a better product, not a worse one, as long as you're just guarding what that intention of the film is. And you know, these guys are saying do it this way and you're like, maybe not that way, but I get what you're saying. And then, you know, you go the way the film wants to go.
Sure. I mean, dude, that's directing though. Like if you at some point we got to hang out, and at some point, like if I'm shooting something, you should come to one of my sets and hang out, because I try to make my sets very much a communal thing. I've said this on a few of my podcasts. I was really fortunate years ago to be invited to hang out on the Farley Brothers film sets, and we went down to Georgia for like the Three Stooges, and we went down to Georgia for like Hall Pass, and those guys are really wonderful dudes from the New England area, and they just welcomed with open arms. We're friends with one of the producers, and we got to hang out and like wear headphones. I was hanging out at a monitor, and as another director, it's such a rare gem to actually be on set and watch another director work, because it's usually a very sort of lonely position as far as trade is concerned. You know, like you can go hang out in a crew position with other camera people and other folks, but when you're at the top of the line, it's very sort of guarded, and people are very worried about whether or not you're going to steal tricks. It's like, what kind of tricks am I going to steal from you? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, totally.
So
or just worried about feeling judged while you're trying to work.
And I get that. There's times when it's right, and there's times when it's not. But
yeah,
I love to have open sets. Like I'll have a whole room with Video Village with folks in there that aren't in the industry. I keep them away from the actors. I keep them away from everything, but they're in the other room, and I'll just walk it back there in the room and go like, so what'd you guys think of that scene? Did you guys buy it? You know, and it's just that moment of reaction where it's like, oh, like sometimes you just need to hear them go, oh, it was super scary. It was really cool. Or like the way my mother would do it, you know, and I have her on all my sets. I love it. And she'll come over to me and she'll go, yeah, that was shit. And I'm like, I know it was. That's why I came back in here. I just need you to tell me it was crap. All right, I'm going to go back out there and fix it. I'm going to go fix it.
Thanks, Ma.
I appreciate it. Thank you for telling me that. I'm gonna go fix this thing.
So you said the script was approved. So do you have like a final draft that has been approved for production then?
Right, we're very close. We're like We're right there.
Nice.
And we're entering the new steps. I can't get into specifics on that, but we're entering into the new steps. I'm very excited about it. The guys that we're working with are really excited about the draft. Will knocked it out of the park. And when he listens to this, you knocked it out of the park, Will. I love you, buddy.
So when you were pitching to the different production companies, did you have to create treatments, or it was just all verbal pitches? And was there, because it sounded like you mentioned that there was a version of a feature script before you were pitching, or there was just the concept of what this new feature would be, and then once they went for it, then you guys wrote the feature script?
It was a pretty much like the version I had written was tossed out pretty early on. So the one
I mean the version Will was talking about.
Yeah, that one we just put together basically a concept. So we had like a massive concept, and we learned from this through the pitching process, by the way. I made like beautiful laminated concept books with like all beautifully done Photoshop work and illustrations. I had comic book artists making me illustrations for concept stuff, all sorts of really great stuff. And then we did like a blow-by-blow layout of how the movie would go. Too much material, actually.
How long would a pitch take you?
About an hour and change. So it was a long pitch. And the problem that we had at that time is that we're not making a movie about werewolves, and we're not making a movie about vampires. You know, we're making a movie that has a lot to do with science and biology. And there's a set of rules that exist within this film that at the time when we were sort of developing it, we're like, okay, there's a lot of technical rules here. So we had to sort of guide you through it. We've since learned our lessons on that and figured out how to make that stuff very simplistic. But we had like diagrams of like transformations and like all this kind of shit. And if you get into the right room and someone's like a total nerd about it and they're like, whoa, when they go through that book, it's really great. But if you get into a room where a guy's like, okay, hit me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I've been in pitches where they're just like, what happens at the end of the movie? Because I need to know the end of the movie and that'll tell me whether or not I can sell it. I mean,
yeah.
And you're like, okay, so I've done too much work. All right. So yeah, we went out with that, and then the short helped. And the great thing about having the management was that they were able to send the short around with a really good email, you know, like shut your blinds, put on headphones, and watch this thing. And so everybody that I was meeting with were already fans of the short, which was very helpful. So you get to go into that room and they're just like, generally first thing they want to talk about is, you know, the short. And they're like, how did you pull this off? Like, how much did that short cost you? You know, I remember being in one of the pitch meetings where they went through the process of trying to prove how much, like they were trying to guess how much I spent on it, which was hysterical to hear that. So yeah, pitching is such a weird thing. You know, and me and Will just did a whole new proof of concept. I have to send it to you. We shot a whole nother thing, and I was just out in LA like 2 months ago doing a whole nother round of pitches for a whole nother thing, which was interesting, and I learned more lessons.
Oh, just a new project altogether.
Dude, because you're sitting on good stuff. I hate sitting around waiting, so it's just like, well, let's keep banging stuff out, and we'll see which one of these kicks.
And are you going through like the same process with that? Just the management sending it out all over again, and then doing the whole pitch thing all over again? Or are you going to the same places that were already interested in you, and you're like, hey, I have this other thing?
There's a bit of that. But then also they're sending it out. They're picking the markets for it. This time around, I'm learning a lot of lessons about just the current climate of the marketplace, which is a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
And like when it's right to go out with stuff. You know, like we turned in, because I shot a whole new film. I shot a whole new proof of concept for this thing. And we turned all that stuff in, surprised our teams with it, management and my agent, which I got from the 12 Cam stuff. We surprised them with the short film like the week that the Harvey Weinstein stuff came out. So like it was like, oh, the timing of that couldn't have been worse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's really, in this business, it seems to be really all about when you drop something, like when it goes out, dude. And then everybody reads it, and then they're tainted by it, and so you know, there are these things.
It's crazy how like with at least at each specific thing, it kind of feels like you got one shot at it, and then that one didn't work. So okay, moving on.
Yeah, we'll see. I've got a call today about that stuff. So
That's great, man.
We'll see.
So have you found that actually having that physical short film is really the best way to go? Come out with that proof of concept and everything else instead of just going with just a traditional straight pitch?
I think if you're a director like I am that hasn't done a feature yet, it's important and imperative.
Yeah.
Because when you go out with a pitch, and even a script, it is all through the brain of, and through like the childhood, through like the taste of whoever that reader is. And most of the time when people are looking at stuff, they're trying to associate things with it immediately. That's why a lot of times when you go into a pitch, you're doing comps with it. You're just like, okay, so this is like Close Encounters meets the Gremlins, you know, and they're like, got it, you know, and
Yeah.
that's usually how you do your verbal pitch stuff. With a short, you can just go, here's the tone. Here's my voice. This may not be what the final film is going to be, but you can watch this and understand, you know, what you're getting. And then, you know, you've seen one of my pieces. You understand the level of quality that you're getting. And just imagine how much I did it for, how much money I didn't have for that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of been essential. I think it's the only reason why, you know, I'm still able to be the director for 12KM is because of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's all exciting stuff, man. I'm really excited for you, and I can't wait to see your first thing because just based off the short, it's going to be great.
What'd you think? Did you like the short? What'd you think about it?
I loved it, man. I loved it. I loved the style. I loved, like you said, your voice and the tone you brought to the whole thing. There was definitely a unique aspect to something that also felt nostalgic. So there was this great mashing of things. I really dug it.
Cool, man. And by the way, you know, because I know a lot of your listeners are like real techie nerds. All that stuff in there was all in camera. So there's no CG. So there's zero CG in the film. And there's a lot of like really cool microscopic stuff that we did, which here, without going on too long. Another funny story with that, reaching out to the right people, I decided I was going to do really intense microscopic stuff in camera. And one of the things that I learned being a shooter is that it's better to do things practically on a low budget because the mistakes end up being gold, as opposed to if you're going to do CG. Because if you do CG, your mistakes look like shit. So
yes, exactly.
Always, dude. And so I was like, I'm going to do everything practically. And I was doing this research on microscopic photography, and I found this dude, Lyndon Gledhill, amazing microscopic photographer, and he was working with the substance that I wanted to use. And so I wrote to him asking him questions like, I see that you're using these oils. I see that you're using this stuff. How does it work? And he wrote back, he goes, well, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm doing a film, doing a short film. And he goes, can I read the script? I said, sure, here's the script, send it to him. And this is before I started filming. And he wrote back and he goes, I love it. I want to do it. And I was like, you want to do what? I didn't even ask you if you want to do, like, what do you want to do? And he goes, I want to be a part of it. I want to be a part of it however I can. And I said, all right, well, do you want to film some of this microscopic stuff with me? You want to get together? And he goes, sure. And so fast forward like a week or two, maybe a month later, I'm in the car with one of my assistants who's been working with me for 10, 11 years, Tony. And we're driving to Pennsylvania. And we're driving to like Amish country, Pennsylvania. And we're headed out there. And he turns to me and he's like, did it ever occur to you that we have no idea who this person is that we're going to stay with? I was like, no, it'll be fine, dude. And he's like, he could murder us out here. Like, look at this place. I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. So we go out and we meet this guy, British dude, really cool. In his basement, he has like all these high-powered microscopes. He does like this really cool sort of science experiment stuff for photography. And we hang out with him for a weekend. And we shoot all of the special effects used for the short in that weekend. And it was this amazing discovery. Like, we're shooting the creature on sets that are no bigger than the surface of a dime.
That's crazy.
We're doing all that kind of stuff. So we shot all that before we actually shot the narrative, which was a smart move on our part.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, and all that stuff looked amazing and added a ton to the overall tone of the piece.
Thank you, dude. You know, it works for the narrative, and it was just it's fun to just use a project like this as an excuse to hang out and talk with people. Like, you know, we're talking, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were, as we wrap up, if you were to give one bit of advice of someone who, you know, is where you were at right before you did 12KM, what would that be? Just to, you know, figure out whatever that passion project is and go all in, or what would you say to them?
I would say that I think that the right story, the right moment, the right life event will present itself to you. It presents itself to everybody. Like you're going to, as a storyteller, you're going to have something tragic. You're going to have something inspiring happen to you. And if it hasn't happened to you yet, worry not, because it will. And in the meantime, just practice the craft. Learn the tricks. Put your toolbox together for these tricks. And then when you have that experience, and I very easily could have given up when I cracked my skull. Like very easily could have been like, bad luck, life is terrible, this is shitty, I'm out of work, I'm done. But I didn't. I was inspired by what I was going through. And you have the same opportunities. And I think that the best thing in the world to do is to jump on that, because at the end of it, it'll inspire you to make something really great. But then you'll also have this amazing life story. And having that story that inspires other people is helpful for you to get people to notice your work. I think a lot of the meetings I had with folks with 12 Cam were that they wanted to sit down and talk to me about the head injury. And they wanted to talk to me about surviving that, which was a big part of it. So just make sure you're building your kit. Make sure you put your toolkit together as a director, and then just be ready, because it's going to happen. You'll have something that comes your way, and jump on it when you do.
That's great, man. I love that.
Thanks, dude.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time. And again, can't wait to see when this thing actually finally comes out.
Yeah, man. Thank you too, man. And I appreciate, I've been a huge fan of what you guys do. So I am honored to be on the show, and I have to have you on my podcast as well.
Yeah,
I think that'd be
let's
cool.
do it. Absolutely.
But thanks so much, my friend.
And that's it for today. If you want to connect with Mike online, you could do that at filmriot.com/podcast. Find the page for this episode, and we have all the links there, including a link to his Instagram if you want to connect with him to see his short film. And Mike has a podcast of his own, which I've really been digging, and you can find a link for his podcast on the page as well. Of course, you can connect with me online at twitter.com/Ryan_Conley. Next week, we're going to have Daniel Ruth on the show, who's a cinematographer that I've worked with on things like Westworld to Yuma and Sentinel. He also just did his first very low budget feature, so we're going to be talking a lot about that. Until then, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.